call this meeting to order, please, of the Santa Barbara City Council. It's a budget hearing. Today is May 20th, 2021. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the roll, please. Ms. Gorman?
Certainly. Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez? Here. Councilmember Harmon? Here. Councilmember Snedden? Here. Councilmember Freeman?
Here.
Councilmember Jordan?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez?
Present.
And Mayor Maria?
Here. Thanks, Ms. Gorman. Would you read the item into the record, please?
Certainly. Item 1, fiscal year 2022 recommended operating and capital budget.
It looks like we'll hear from the City Attorney's Department first, and then we'll take public comment, and then we'll hear from the Police Department, and then we'll take public comment there. So that's how we're handling public comment today. Mr. Kalan, are you there and ready for your budget presentation? Welcome.
I am indeed, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Thank you. Today, my job is to explain to the council and the community why you should spend 2.4% of your $167 million general fund budget on legal. Next slide, please. I want to start with our mission statement. It's important to us. First, we are part of the city team, and that has implications I'll explain as we go through the presentation. Secondly, our duties identify 5 separate qualities: competence, helpfulness, timeliness, cost effectiveness, and independence. Those are the qualities we wish the council, community, and the city team to evaluate our performance on. Next slide. Our agenda today will be to talk about the department a little bit, open up the doors to our remote offices, to talk about what we have in store, to talk about the numbers, and then to talk about the impacts of the last year, as well as how we hope to measure ourselves in the future. Next slide, please. Next slide. So our organization is fairly traditional for a municipal law office, whether public or private. Our prime functional areas are an advisory group, a civil litigation group, and a code enforcement group. Administration represents a fraction of my time, a large portion of my assistant's time. Next slide, please. Now, this starts to explain more detail. And what you can see is that we have a heavy concentration in both our advisory and civil litigation functions. I highlight that because the balance in work between those two functions is something I look at very closely. I would prefer a situation where we are doing more advisory work than we are litigation. And I'm happy to say that we are getting into a position where we are beginning to do more advisory work than litigation. I couldn't say that a few years ago. I want to give you a little key to this slide. The 2 bottommost positions that are identified as vacant are part of our budget correction measures. The red vacancy under administration for senior legal services analyst is the program manager position the city council authorized earlier this year and will reauthorize in this budget. We've completed interviews for that position and are close to making a hire. Next slide. Now, this slide confused me when I initially looked at it, so I want to identify the confusion. The appropriations identified in this slide are basically $4 million share of the city's budget are divided up by the percentages you see. You'll notice that the percentages don't match the full-time equivalent numbers in the pie. Why is that? Some of the employees in the advisory function are more expensive employees than some of the employees in the civil litigation function. So while you might expect the FTEs and expenditures or appropriations to match up, they don't exactly because of the mix of different talents in each division in our office. Next slide, please. So where are we? I am very, very happy to report that on April 26th, we filled our open Assistant City Attorney 4 position. However, as part of our budget savings program, we were able to fill that at a Deputy City Attorney level. That's an entry-level position. I've informed the council about our candidate. We're extraordinarily impressed with her and very pleased to have her. As I just mentioned, yesterday I completed interviews for our Senior Legal Services Analyst. That too is a position that we are extremely excited about for reasons I'll talk about later. Next slide, please. I had fun with this. There we are. It's quite a team. None of us are civil service. All of us are employed at will. I serve at the pleasure of the city council. So it's a two-way street with these employees and our employer-employee relationship here. Again, these people don't owe their careers to the protection of the charter. They owe their careers to their talent and skill. So it is incumbent on me in particular, but also on all of us in the city team to recruit and retain the best people possible for our community. And that's been my singular effort for the last 7 years, to essentially manage a team to align the strengths and skills in the best possible way for the community. And I'm really, really proud of this team. Again, you see on this slide the 3 areas of red. The 1.0 legal assistant and 0.75 assistant city attorney are the holds we are using in our budget to save approximately $200,000, which is our share of the necessary reductions. The senior legal services analyst is in the red and green because we're in the process of filling that. Next slide, please. Next slide. I want to say this appropriately. We've all had an extraordinarily difficult year. At the same time, I'm extremely proud of the way this office performed during that year. And in fact, I kind of feel good about it. So I'm in the awkward spot of having lived through a tragic year in many ways, and at the same time feeling quite proud of the performance that a group of 14 committed people were able to produce. You'll recall that in the early days of COVID, we were absorbed with the eviction moratorium and the basic orders that we helped Mr. Casey design and issue. We were then heavily involved with Mr. Casey, Mr. Dayton, Mr. Harris on the economic recovery ordinance, and we will continue to be heavily involved. I've said it publicly before, I'll repeat it now. With the State Street Promenade, we are creating a massive new public space, and great public spaces are developed with great attention to detail. We engaged in quite a bit of health and safety enforcement during the heavy days of the COVID shutdown. What that translates to is our city attorney investigator and assistant city prosecutor, both positions this council funded a few years ago in recognition of the need for an upgrade in this office, those folks spent quite a bit of time on the street working with businesses to get through both our outdoor dining regulations and mask regulations. Hundreds and hundreds of contacts by my office on those issues. We pushed through last year the 711 North Milpas Development Agreement. That work is underway. The council pushed through the Just Cause Eviction and Relocation Assistance Ordinance. And I'm using the term pushed through because these are efforts. These are community efforts. The council, on behalf of this community, undertakes a massive load with each of these regulatory projects. There are so many dimensions to cover. We attempt to lighten that load for the council, but we're never perfect at it. So each of these efforts are shared burdens between staff, council, and community. We undertook towards the latter part of 2020, looking seriously at vacancy control and a senior overlay to protect our vulnerable mobile home park residents. Lastly, our office played a significant role in helping the council design its civilian review system, or begin to design its civilian review system with the assistance of the Community Formation Commission. Let me say that I'm sure all of us have been elevated to take on the challenges created by the murder of George Floyd in the most serious and sincere way we can. For my part, I'm extremely proud that our office has been able to assist both the council and the commission so far. Next slide, please. Now, code enforcement and prosecution was very busy last year. Mr. Way reported to you in March on our efforts there. What is it about? It's about protecting public spaces and neighborhood improvement. The future of our enforcement division, which is new, and I would respectfully submit to you, critically important for the city. The future is in neighborhood support, whether it's policing vacation rentals, seeking gun violence restraining orders, or prosecuting municipal code crimes. Our focus is now and has always been protective and restorative, not punitive. And I mean that on all fronts, whether it's a structure or a human. Our goal is restorative and protective. Now, the council is aware that on March 30th, you appointed a 3-judge panel comprising the Independent Redistricting Commission that grew out of the California Voting Rights Act settlement the city entered into to switch to district elections. That commission was impaneled on March 30th and has met initially. We will be meeting again next Wednesday, the 26th at 5 p.m. It's a televised meeting. All are welcome. The council picked a wonderful panel that will be very anxious and has expressed its desire to work directly with the community on the neighborhood issues around designing the city's electoral districts. 2 of the 3 judges are bilingual in Spanish. One of the judges is a native Spanish speaker. Recently, we completed the hazard-based premium pay ordinance and the historic resources ordinance. And I'm pleased to say that the Peony receivership we started several years ago is showing really good results. The picture you see is a before and after. We have volumes of those. It was expensive, it's hard, it was necessary. Next slide, please. Okay, our priority projects for this year. I want to focus on the word upgrade there, administrative upgrade with senior legal services analyst. What is a senior legal services analyst? we're carrying almost 17 FTEs, and I am the full-time administrator for the office while attempting to practice law full-time and administer our office legal database full-time. That has its disadvantages. Our office has become keenly aware that a professional administrator can provide very significant efficiencies, not only here, but citywide. So the reason we've gotten excited about adding this person to our office is that we think he or she will be a key liaison, bringing us closer to the rest of the organization, helping us meet those 5 qualities I identified on our mission slide, and helping us, most importantly, really most importantly, being openly accountable for what we do and what we don't do. We're very active. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I mentioned mobile home vacancy control and the senior overlay. Homelessness impacts, what does that mean? California right now, north, south, central, is experiencing the obvious presence of homelessness and homeless people in a way we haven't seen in many, many years. So we've got a problem that's been with us since we've all existed, but it's a problem now that's highly visible and it's impacting our public spaces in a significant way. We're going to be working on how to address those impacts very, very seriously next year. I'm in agreement with the people in the justice, mental health, and equity communities that threats of criminal punishment and incarceration are not long-term solutions to homelessness. Where the city's policy develops from there remains to be seen. I commend the council's effort to collaborate with the county and to continue our work with SB Act and CityNet, as well as the safe parking program the city funds through New Beginnings. I've highlighted safe routes to school enforcement as a program area I have asked my code enforcement and prosecution team to look at. And I say look at because the specifics of what we will do is not yet clear, and it will be multi-departmental. My concern is pretty simple. We have had a year without children on the streets. We've had a year of relatively low traffic. My purely anecdotal, purely my own observation is that people are driving faster. Our Safe Routes to School program and plan include a number of requirements and design characteristics that are important on these pathways. At a minimum, I am asking our prosecutor and investigator to go out on the safe routes to school and assure that we have clear sight triangles at all the major intersections. That's important work, and we're going to go forward with it. I mentioned redistricting. That will consume quite a bit of time in the last quarter of this year when we get the census data. I'm very pleased to say that Mr. Casey has appointed several of his staff who have taken the laboring oar. I greatly appreciate that. Lastly, clean energy. You heard Ms. Parento recognize the help she's gotten from Sarah Connect and Dan Henschke. I appreciate that recognition as much as I appreciate the council's effort in clean energy. We will be spending considerable time making sure that we get into this new business safely. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about numbers. Next slide. Okay, you saw this already, and the point to be repeated here is the difference between money and people. Next slide. Okay, this is an area where, again, I use the term administrative upgrade. One of the areas I suspect we may be able to improve with a professional administrator, which is what I characterize our senior legal services analyst position as. A professional administrator is going to help us identify grant and other revenue streams to support expanded functions in this office. As I said to the council in asking you to approve our prosecution division, I believe that one area the city can expand its range of services is under the general rubric of consumer protection. The city has done that for many, many years with your rental housing mediation board, successfully implemented with the good work of Andrea Bifano. I think there are other consumer protection areas that may be of interest to the council. What I am interested in is sources of funding for those programs that may not hit the general fund. So I am optimistic that part of the administrative upgrade I'm asking you to pay for with our senior legal services analyst will result in offsetting revenues. Next slide, please. This is pretty simple. We're taking about a 9.5% cut over last year. Much of the money is coming out of reduced outside counsel expenditures. That's the parenthetical $627,729. The parenthetical $196,255 is the money that we are achieving through holding positions open and, as it were, underfilling an assistant city attorney position. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, here's the spelled out version of that $196,000 reduction. We're holding a legal assistant position open. That is difficult, but it is something I wanted to test beginning in 2014. So the book or the results are still out on whether we can sustain that kind of reduction, but it's worth testing. Now, the other reduction to get to our $196,000 was, as I said, underfilling a position. And I really don't like underfilling as a term, frankly. I think the position was appropriately filled. I am concerned about the long term for this office as well as the near term. And by long term, I mean 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And frankly, I want lawyers who will be here in 10, 15, and 20 years to complement those of us who hope not to be here in 10, 15, or 20 years. Next slide, please. What are the service level impacts I'm anticipating? Public Records Act requests, as you've heard repeatedly from your administrative departments, are an issue. They will be slowed somewhat. Having said that, I need to let you know that I have one of our legal assistants who is spending at times more than half of her day working on public records issues in conjunction with the clerk's office. Mr. Casey and I felt it was essential that we provide that support. And while it is clearly borrowing against our efficiency in other areas, that's the kind of judgment call you expect Paul and Ariel to make on tough situations like our current Public Records Act. So I have realigned a staff person to support that function and taken it away from other support. Fortunately, we are getting away with it because in the last 5 years, the lawyers in the office have truly increased their ability to work without paper and to use our database as their central system. We also have a vacant 3/4 assistant city attorney 4 that could result in advisory work delays. I'm not sure though. And the reason I'm not sure is, again, the administrative upgrade the council is supporting us in paying for with the new senior legal services analyst. I think we're going to see tremendous benefit. Just the freedom for the lawyers, knowing that they have someone who is double checking what they have due, reminding them, providing that high level support, that will result in increased efficiency. I'm excited because this is going to mean 6 hours a week for me saved through the addition of this position. And I hope that will be real lawyer time I can devote to the city. So the reason, coming back to one of our earliest slides, the reason for my excitement and characterization of this as an upgrade is that I believe the legal services analyst will provide the same kind of synergy to the whole city organization that Mr. Way and Mr. Alva and Ms. Scott have provided with our prosecution division. Meaning our prosecution division has not added so much as it has unlocked what is already there. The exciting administrative changes we can make are the ones that unlock more from what we already have. So I'm very excited that this position is coming, and I'm optimistic it will make a real difference. Next slide, please. Next slide. We will put out our customer service survey this fall, and of course, we'll do our legislative report. I've kept these objectives very concise, and I will continue to do so. I am happy to build different kinds of objectives. Next slide. Now, I said it that way because another part of the administrative upgrade that I want to emphasize is that I fully expect our senior legal services analyst to work with the departments to create performance objectives that are designed by our clients. The council knows that I have been peddling since the year 2000 a concept called collaborative legal budgeting. And that's a process that attempts to create a dialogue between department and lawyers so that we can prepare ahead of time for the department's needs over the next year. So the question becomes, how do you avoid being reactive all the time when you're a lawyer? We do a much better job, as most professions do, when we have time to prepare, plan, study, and organize ourselves before undertaking something. When we are doing it reactively, we think we're pretty darn good, but I know that I'm not as good when I'm reactive as when I am proactive. So my goal is to turn these performance objectives into the objectives of your departments and to hold myself and this office accountable for co-accomplishing the objectives of your departments. Next slide, please. Be happy to take any questions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Kalan. The floor is open for questions from our city council. I guess I'd like to start just by thanking you for all the work that you've done putting together the civilian oversight package, you and Mr. Doimus, and the hero pay ordinance. I think we throw things at you sometimes, Mr. Kawan. So I just get those thank yous off my chest. Ms. Sneddon, I think you were first, and then Mr. Jordan with questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Klon. I'll also add thank you for Historic Resources Ordinance and also the our Community Choice Energy. These are huge undertakings. I'm really grateful that we are now going to have the Senior Legal Services Analyst, which we all really support and can't wait for. My question about the performance objectives, I thought I heard you say that the new position will help be a liaison with departments for priorities. And as Mayor Murillo just said, we do throw quite a few things out there to handle quickly or on different timeframes. And I'm hoping that you can tell me a timeline, like an actual months or a date. And this is really all that I'm asking for. On when we as the council in closed session, probably because it's privileged, but could see that list of priorities so that when we are throwing something out to be worked on immediately, we understand that that changes something else, or something else that was on the back burner for 4 years or more that finally makes its way through. We understand that it's because other things happen. So I think I really need I'm asking for an actual timeline of when we could expect to as a council be able to see that in its entirety.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me translate, Councilmember Sneddon, the way I hear what you're asking. One of the key duties of a lawyer is to keep her client informed. And one of the areas that we do not have a crisp, defined system for is reporting out, either to the departments or to the council. Now, we cover that with lots of communication, but it's not like you expect a weekly newsletter. So in database parlance, which is what we're talking about with our legal database, it contains virtually everything we do. Our new analyst will have the skill to prepare reports from that database. And the power of a database, a relational database, is of course its ability to collate and cross-reference. So our system is capable of producing all of the top assignments from a given department and producing reports on how much time we've expended on those. So what I would like to suggest is that we set a time, perhaps by the end of the first quarter, where both in conjunction with performance evaluation of me and having the resource of this analyst available, we can identify the kinds of reports we ought to prepare and the frequency. I know both Mr. Casey and I would love the real-time ability to say, here's what would drop. And so I would like to do that. I think the analyst will be able to do that. Our database is extremely powerful. I don't have time to do SQL programming, however much I like doing it. I just don't have time. It's a poor use of your lawyer's time. So our analyst will produce whatever reports the council wants, period. Thank you.
Thank you. And so by the first quarter, we could expect, I'm not asking for real-time shuffling, but we could expect to see the priorities. What brings it up for me today is the safe routes to school. And while I think that is incredibly important and probably top of the list, it's new. And so then I'm wondering, in the priorities of the city attorney's office, with all that you have going on, where does that fit? And that's not a real-time shuffling every day or newsletter weekly, but sort of, I think, quarterly. And I'm gonna defer to colleagues also, but I guess I'll put that forward as a question, if that's reasonable. that we should know the order of priorities so that we can make sure certain departments aren't over prioritized or under prioritized, or that policies that we as a council are trying to put forward aren't dominating your time or aren't being put on delay or anything like that. And it's not a judgment, it's just I have no knowledge of where these fit in priority. Yeah, thank you.
I should add a piece that explains our current process. I don't want to leave the impression that we're not paying attention to priorities. Each month, I meet with each department head along with the responsible departmental lawyer, and we go through the database work list of what they have submitted and whether it's been addressed, whether priorities need to be adjusted. So we are doing that at the department level. What is not happening is an overarching coordination, and that's why I use the word synergy. I am fully expecting Mr. Casey's office to make use of the legal services analyst to, well, I won't say as much as I will, but to a great degree. So.
Thank you. That answers my question. I'm really looking forward to that analyst coming on. Thank you so much, Mr. Klon.
Thanks. Mr. Jordan, your turn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just, Mr. Klon, just really have questions about the analysts too. Last I heard, we had recruited, it didn't go well for whatever reason, and we were recruiting some more. We can project how, whatever role we are and the benefit we're gonna be, but when will we have to wait? I mean, to as best as you know, because not all of it is on you.
I'm sorry, you froze for a minute there, council member. I'm sorry.
The last I heard, the analyst process hit a snag. We advertised and maybe didn't get what we wanted for the money we wanted to pay. So I'm interested in what the status is there.
I completed interviews yesterday.
Okay.
I have less than a handful of candidates that have been recommended by a non-city attorney panel. And I think there's a hireable person in there.
Great, super. That's all I was looking for, and happy to hear that. Like I'm sure everybody else is going to tell you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'm sensitive because the candidates are probably watching us.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Kalan. Any other questions for our city attorney on his proposed budget? Let's see if there's public comment. Ms. Gorman, is anyone raising their hand in the GoToWebinar audience?
Madam Mayor, no hands raised in the GoToWebinar audience for this item.
Okay, thank you. We're back to the council to make closing remarks. I thank you for making tightening. I won't use the word cutting, it is so extreme, but for presenting a budget that does let go of 100% what you want to do. But I'll let Mr. Friedman make his remarks at this point.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Mr. Clone. I'll just be brief. I want to thank you for all the work that you and your staff have done over last year in particular. It's been a very challenging year, especially in response to a lot of the emergency ordinances we had to put up in regard to, one was the emergency ordinances that allowed us to respond to the COVID, to State Street, to enable that to take place. It wasn't easy, and you did have to do some adjustments, and there was no roadmap for it before. So you used your best judgment, and we were able to take action and go back and adjust in a very timely manner, and that was appropriate rather than waiting it out. And so I think the community understood that, and really on some of these issues really responded that we did take action, and a large part of that was you and your staff to ensure that we were taking the appropriate legal courses in addition to implementing the public works aspect of it in a lot of these challenges and public health aspects of it. So I really wanted to recognize that. And I am pleased that you're finalizing the administrative budget position that we've talked about. I think it will help, especially in terms of addressing the timelines issue and the priorities that Councilmember Sneddon was talking about. I think that is something that we as council have always struggled with. and raise that when we bring new initiatives, what that means in terms of the workload for you. And I think it will allow all of us to have a better dialogue and more informed that anything new that comes up especially within limited resources that we have now, will bump something else. So to have that information, I think will be informative for us, and it will help us help you manage your workload rather than us just think we can put it on there. So again, just really thank you for all the work you and your staff have done over the last year, and look forward to the coming year and having that new position and seeing how that can really help us overall with our processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to echo Councilmember Friedman, and I couldn't let this opportunity pass without just saying, Mr. City Attorney, as a lawyer myself, I am so constantly amazed by the depth and breadth of expertise in your office. Just any legal question on any subject, having worked with your lawyers this past year more closely than I have ever before, and I just truly, I think it's something that folks watching really need to know. Actually, we have incredible talent in our city attorney's office, and I really look up to you all professionally in terms of just knowing what you're talking about and understanding the law. So I had to take this opportunity to put that out there. Very much appreciate it, and really looking forward, as my colleague said, to this new administrative specialist. I also understand how complicated it is to manage clients and projects, and so that's going to be a really good thing, and I think it's going to serve our city and our residents really well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Any other closing remarks on the city attorney's budget? Well, I'll just say I really liked the photo gallery of your employees. That was special. And thanks for doing hard work, not all of it pleasant. I know code enforcement isn't, you try to do customer service and you're functioning in a lot of different ways that are challenging for your staff. So we thank them and thank you for a crisp budget presentation. Mr. Kalan, and we'll close this item then with thanks and move on in our budget hearing.
May I say one thing, Mayor?
Oh, please, yes.
I'm extremely proud to work for this council and this community. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, and we respect you back. So excellent. We'll move on because we're clipping along here to the police department budget. There's our Chief Malekian. Welcome, sir. We're all ears. Go for it.
Mayor Murillo and members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to present this fiscal year's budget for the Santa Barbara Police Department. This is my first presentation to this council and will likely be my last. It is my privilege to represent the men and women of the police department, and I know that you're all aware of this, but the city is incredibly well served by your sworn officers and professional staff. I'm joined today by Captain Todd Stoney, Captain Mary Linda Arroyo, and our business manager, Lori Peterson. We are all aware that the killing of George Floyd, can we have the next slide, please? The killing of George Floyd ignited intense conversations regarding the role that law enforcement should play in American society. I think our challenge is that when we finish having a 30,000-foot discussion about the state of law enforcement nationally, we need to have a 500-foot discussion as to the issues to be addressed locally. And that, I think, is what this budget presentation is all about. Joel Kotkin, in his book, The City, said that for a city to be successful, it must be sacred, safe, and busy. By sacred, he meant that it evoked an emotional response, that the people who live and work there care deeply about the place and were willing to expend their time and talent towards advancing its success. By safe, he meant that people did not need to think about whether or not they were safe because they could assume that they were. Too often, safety is defined as knowing what areas to avoid or by seeing law enforcement officers on every corner. This limited definition of safety should not be what we are striving to achieve. You will see in this budget presentation a focus on transformation and a focus on changing the definition of safety. And lastly, by busy, Kotkin meant that the city was economically viable. that business could function under an umbrella of safety, and that commerce could flow in an organized and predictable fashion. The Santa Barbara Police Department is committed to advancing each of these components with the goal of ensuring a prosperous Santa Barbara that serves to benefit all of its residents. In today's presentation, we will articulate our organizational priorities, provide you with an overview of the police department, present our recommended budget, and describe the service level impacts brought about by the city's response to COVID and the ensuing fiscal constraints. And we will discuss future challenges. Next slide, please. I've had the privilege of serving as your interim police chief since March the 1st. And these are difficult times, both fiscally and politically. In many ways, the response to COVID provided the opportunity for a reset in terms of how law enforcement services are delivered. As our society is now in the process of reopening, the questions become, what do we keep doing? What do we keep not doing? What do we go back to doing that we were doing before? A budget document is at its core a statement about what is important both to the department and the city. In difficult financial times, it is very common to hear the phrase, we will do more with less. I've always disliked that phrase. No one does more with less, they just do less of the same. The national question around policing is, what do we want from law enforcement agencies? The local question in Santa Barbara is the same. To answer that question, I thought it critical to articulate priorities for both the community and the men and women of the police department. I would like to propose the following 4 objectives as our overarching priorities. These priorities were selected with the full knowledge that they will be inherited by the permanent police chief. However, I believe they reflect the values of our city and the department that serves it. Consequently, I believe they will be sustainable, and I hope they meet this council's expectation. Next slide, please. First, we must improve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. The Santa Barbara Police Department is tasked with making all of the neighborhoods in our city safe in the broadest sense of the word. Crime reduction is a critical part of that effort, but it is not the only part. Our focus will shift from strict enforcement to an emphasis on harm reduction. So, for example, when dealing with the homeless, we can take an enforcement tack of arresting for crimes, or we can focus on delivering services and helping other city and community agencies identify alternative places for people to live. We will partner with other city departments and the community at large. Our focus will continue to be the building of relationships with the community and the solving of neighborhood problems, which is the definition of community policing. We will establish the concept of a felt presence rather than simply maintaining an obvious enforcement posture. Next slide, please. We will seek to transform the mission of patrol. Patrol officers are the most visible representatives of our agency. Patrol officers come into contact with countless people every day. They have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of everyone with whom they interact. The truth or falsity of constitutional principles are determined by the actions of individual officers and how they treat the people with whom they contact. For decades, the quality of patrol has been measured in outputs rather than outcomes. For example, tickets written as opposed to traffic accidents prevented. Over the next few weeks, we will develop different holistic metrics by which to measure the degree to which we are engaged in relationship building and maintaining public trust. Next slide, please. The final report of the 2015 Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing remains a valuable guide that this department will continue to embrace. Officer wellness is one of the pillars of that report. It means caring for the well-being of all our employees, both physically and emotionally. The law enforcement profession places great emphasis on officer safety, but often with a focus on external forces. However, true officer safety means not only being willing to risk your life to save your partner, but being equally willing to risk criticism, to perhaps save that partner's career and to protect a member of the public from harm. Joseph Wambaugh wrote that the greatest danger to a law enforcement officer was not a criminal's bullet or a speeding car, but rather the daily drop of corrosion on the human soul. Internal procedural justice simply says that all of our departmental members, regardless of rank, position, or assignment, must be treated in the same way we ask them to treat the public. Our actions as an agency with respect to how our administrative processes work, such as discipline, transfers, etc., must reflect fairness, equity, and transparency. A Southwest Airlines study almost 30 years ago, and has been replicated several times, found a direct correlation between how Southwest ticket agents treated the public and how those agents were treated by their immediate supervisors. We will learn that lesson and continue to study it. Next slide, please. In regards to recruitment and retention, this last year has been incredibly difficult for law enforcement. The dedication and caring of the many have been tarnished by the horrific actions of a few. The consequence is that some people within the law enforcement profession are questioning the value and purpose of their work. Many people outside the profession are expressing opinions that ensure that neither they nor the people they influence will consider law enforcement as a career option. And additionally, Santa Barbara has unique challenges in terms of recruitment, not the least of which is housing costs. Some of our employees commute several hours each day. While we will not solve that problem in the short term, we can ensure that the working environment is supportive. As you will see shortly, we are facing significant staffing challenges, and they are presenting some difficult choices. Law enforcement has evolved over the last decade. The recruiting effort used to be focused on the spirit of adventure. It has shifted dramatically to a focus on recruiting in the spirit of service. Santa Barbara Police Department has embraced this concept for several years. Several years ago, our focus shifted from recruiting people who we thought might make good police officers to recruiting good human beings, confident that we could teach them how to be excellent police officers. The concept of the spirit of service is sometimes referred to as the guardian model. Our recruitment efforts will continue to focus on attracting people who are committed to service and to serving that guardian model. And our retention efforts will focus on ensuring that we practice internal and external procedural justice, as well as the basic principles of employee wellness. Next slide, please. And the next slide after that, we're going to look now at the organizational chart of the department. This is a broad overview of the department. You will see that we now have 2 captain positions to oversee the 2 divisions. Historically, we had a deputy chief and 3 captains. The deputy chief position was eliminated several years ago, and the 3rd captain position was not filled after the last captain retired last December. The position of the community accountability lieutenant was created last year, but this is not a new position, but rather new duties assigned to the professional standards lieutenant. Next slide. This is how the department is budgeted by division. You can see that they're split primarily between field operations and strategic operations, and we're going to talk briefly about what each of those is about. Next slide, please. What you have in front of you now is the staffing composition. There are 3 columns. The budgeted positions, that is those positions that this council has authorized. The current level, that is the positions that are filled. And the functional strength, which is those people who are actually at work, as opposed to being off on injury, other assignments that I'll talk about in a second, and maternity leave, military leave, those kind of things. And you can see that we are actually down 34 sworn positions, which functionally means we are 24% below our authorized strength. And our professional staff, which are sometimes referred to as civilians or non-sworn, but not a term I prefer. I prefer professional staff, are down 14 positions as well. Next slide, please. This is just what the chief staff looks like. I talked about the community accountability lieutenant. And in addition, the 2 community liaison officers were taken from patrol. Again, those are not new positions, but rather they are positions that were created in response to the events of last year, but did not result from any additional staffing. Next slide, please. This is the field operations divisions, essentially dispatch and patrol. You'll see that we have 3 lieutenants and a dispatch manager. Take a second, I want to really call out the role of dispatch, which I believe is historically underappreciated, but they're perhaps the most pivotal point in the allocation of resources. And in the long-term discussion about alternative delivery models from traditional law enforcement, we can't forget about the role of dispatch. And they are currently understaffed, as you're going to see in a minute, and that understaffing is having an impact on our patrol strength. We have 2 lieutenants assigned to oversee the patrol operations 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the assistant division commander oversees the special projects such as the bike team, the traffic enforcement, and the nightlife unit. Next slide, please. This is just a breakdown of field operations staffing. And I would call your attention to the fact that 6 officers are assigned to dispatch full-time to fill understaffing in that area. And I would be very remiss if I did not throw a shout out to Human Resources, who have just done an incredible job trying to help us fill these positions. This is an incredibly difficult position. It is, as I said a minute ago, it's incredibly underappreciated. And we really appreciate the effort that HR has gone to. We have a number of people who are processing in the pipeline. And hopefully over the next, before the fiscal year is over, we will have resolved this vacancy issue. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the Strategic Operations Division. It, for the most part, is a consolidation of the division that went away with the commander that was retired. It includes the business office, records, IT, personnel, and criminal investigations. Next slide. This slide I'd like to call your attention to because the Personnel Bureau is in this division. The department vacancies are technically carried here. We currently have 18 sworn vacancies, 11 funded but unfilled, and 7 held. If we get to a place where we fill those 11, we will have the opportunity then to fill the remaining 7. But for the moment, they're held out of the budget. 10 professional staff vacancies, I mentioned. 7 officers on either injured on duty or other leave, and 3 officers in the academy. So functionally, although they're filling a spot, they're not here with us. Next slide, please. I'd now like to go to the department highlights and the things that we did over the course of the last year. We'll talk a little bit more later, but our response to COVID, I think, has really been exceptional. Over the last 14 months, only 12 employees in the department tested positive for COVID. And we had an incredible partnership with both the fire department and Cottage Hospital to achieve that goal. Next slide. I'm sorry, my error. Back up, please. Increased call for social justice following the killing of George Floyd. This department, and obviously law enforcement in general, is certainly in the nation's spotlight. And locally, we have increased our community engagement efforts with the adding of the accountability lieutenant and the 2 community liaison officers. Our department policies, which were reviewed and updated, although I must say that the previous chief had really taken the department a long way in terms of upgrading and updating policies to bring them in line with the most current national thinking, and continued partnership with various community organizations. Our co-response effort, we're very proud of the fact that we now have a full-time team partnered with County Behavioral Wellness. And as we look at filling what the role or the function of the restorative policing effort will be, it may be that we can, if we can pull off another psychiatric social worker from behavioral wellness, we may be able to add a second team. That's certainly one of my goals. And then our bilingual outreach improved significantly over the course of the last year. And the 2 most obvious examples was our online crime map, which is part of our website, as well as the online reporting effort, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Both are now available both in English and Spanish. Next slide, please. This infographic I'd like to spend some time with. This one, this graphic really sort of demonstrates the function of patrol and what your department and specifically what your patrol section does. The outer blue circle is what I would call the reactive circle. That is, people call and ask for service, and people, one or more professional officers will come out and help deal with whatever problem is presented to them. The inner blue circle is our proactive team, the bike team, the traffic unit, the drinking driver unit, restorative and co-response, those efforts that are really designed to try to address community problems before they require enforcement actions. And what I'd like to call your attention to is the right-hand side of this infographic to demonstrate some of the triage efforts that go on. Starting at about 1 o'clock, you will see 59,000 law enforcement calls. That is 59,000 times less in 2020. People called dispatch with a policing-related problem. The total number of calls was 128,700. In addition, there were 11,000 calls to the fire department and 5,400 calls for emergency medical dispatch. The rest of those calls were either requests for information, administrative items, or items that could be referred elsewhere. Of the 59,000 calls, only 29,300 of them were dispatched to cars in the field, and that's less than 50%. So there's some triaging going on there as well, whether it's online reporting, whether it's transferring someone to another city department, whatever it is, 29,000 calls were dispatched in the field. Of those 29,000, only 2,300, a little over 2,300 resulted in an arrest, and that's just under 8%. The other thing that I would point out to you at about the 11 o'clock position on the graphic is where it says field activity, almost 46,000 calls for service. This includes the dispatch calls and the officer initiated calls. And if you look at the fact that only 2,300 calls resulted in an arrest, and force was only used less than 0.5% of the time. It's an extraordinarily low number, and it is in keeping with the long-term history of the department. One other thing that's worthy of note is that out of 16,000 reports that were taken last year, 3,200, a little over, almost 3,300 were taken online. That's over 20%, and our intent is to increase this percentage this year, which has the effect of freeing up patrol time. Next slide, please. Here's some basic department data point. I'm not going to walk you through all of them other than to call your attention to about 7 o'clock on the wheel, 316 bicycle thefts last year. And this problem has continued into this year. We're going to talk a little bit about it when we talk about specific problems. Next slide, please. Highlight the objectives for the upcoming fiscal year. One is the selection of the permanent chief. I think that process is underway. I believe the posting is likely to occur in the next week or so, and hopefully by the end of summer, early fall, that position will be filled, and the next generation of leadership for this department will be in place. It's our intention to begin issuing body-worn cameras in July to patrol and to complete the rollout of that program by the end of the calendar year. We are required to participate in the Racial Identity Profiling Act, and this actually has some significance. We will start collecting that data. We're required to start collecting that data on January 1st of 2022. We will likely begin that process earlier than that. And our first report is due to the state of California in April of 2023. Crisis intervention training, the 8-hour block of instruction on dealing with the mentally ill. Currently 35% of the department has received that training. My goal is that by the end of the fiscal year, we will have trained 100% of our sworn personnel and dispatchers. Next slide, please. We'll continue to focus on specific neighborhood projects, bike thefts along the waterfront, hotel area, State Street, the East Side Park issues, and youth violence reduction throughout the city will continue to be a priority. I reported on that a few weeks ago. In addition, we are moving forward with the deemed approved ordinance. We went to the Planning Commission last week. We will come back to the Planning Commission on June the 10th. And then the changes to the animal control ordinance are working their way through the process. They're currently being proposed. The changes to the ordinance are currently being reviewed by the city attorney's office. I can talk about that more if people wish. Next slide. I'm now going to take a break and turn this presentation over to our business manager, Lori Peterson, who will actually walk you through the specifics of our budget. Lori?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Lori Peterson, business manager, and it is my pleasure to present the fiscal year 2022 Police Department budget. Next slide, please. The Police Department budget is comprised of three main funding sources, with the largest coming from the general fund at $41.4 million, or 90% of our budget. And then there are three smaller funds that are add to that. We have $4.2 million of revenue that the department receives directly through citations and permits and licensing. We also have $462,000 in grants and supplemental law enforcement service funds that come into the department, and then a small chunk of regional data sharing that comes in at around $86,000. Next slide, please. So here's a close-up of the $4.8 million that the department brings in. As I mentioned, it is kind of a combination of three things. The largest portion is the taxes, fees, and fines, which represents the $2.7 million, which is parking citation revenue, public safety, sales tax, and municipal court fines. The next largest portion is the $776,000 in service charges for things like special events, false alarm fees, vehicle releases, and fingerprinting. And then the third largest category is the internal transfer, which is about $600,000, which is traffic safety money that is transferred into the department from the traffic safety fund. And then it's also the street sweeping program support of staffing in the amount of approximately $360,000. Next slide, please. So the proposed departmental revenues, this chart here shows the comparison of fiscal year 2021 amended budget to the fiscal year 2022 recommended, showing that there's a almost $560,000 reduction in revenues. So a large portion of that you can see is in the intergovernmental, federal, and state category. And what that is that a portion of that comes from grants, and those aren't budgeted until they are actually received by the department, which causes this kind of swing in the value. The next area that we also had a reduction in was in service charges. Again, anticipating that as the community reopens up, that we're probably not going to go back to the level of service until later in the year, and reflecting that in the slightly reduced revenue. And then some minor reduction in taxes, fees, and fines. Next slide, please. So the next couple slides will focus on our proposed expenditures. This chart here shows that the majority of our expenses are related to salaries and benefits, which represents about 88% of our budget. The next smallest category is supplies and services at $2.8 million, and then allocated costs at $2.4 million, or about 5% of the budget. Next slide, please. The proposed expenditures here show, again, just a comparison to FY 2021 to the FY 2022. And then also this shows the reductions that the department made in order to meet its reduction target. The majority of the reductions were done in salaries and benefits, and I'll discuss that in a following slide, along with a reduction in supplies and services at about $500,000. Next slide, please. Next slide. So to meet our reductions in the salary and benefits area, we held about 1.5 million in salary and benefits, and that's comprised of holding open the captain position, 2 sergeant positions, 4 officer positions, an administrative specialist, and then also continuing to not use hourly staff, which represents about 15,000 hours or 16 part-time employees that provided service at the department. Next slide, please. The reductions for supplies and services were through the elimination or the continued elimination of the sobering center downtown. We're now participating in the county's part and program and using their sobering center, which also provides a 360 coverage for those clients and helps to address other issues besides alcohol. We reduced our professional services contracts as well and special events contracts as part of that reduction of $500,000. Next slide, please. So with these reductions, the potential impacts are going to be that the continued shifting of workloads to other staff and potentially not doing some things that we have done in the past. The hourly staffing, the impacts can be seen in that we no longer have the restorative court liaisons to participate in that program, reflected in reduced lobby hours as we had 3 hourly staff who helped staff the lobby. The Explorer program and the cadet program are not being used at this point. The cadets and the Explorers also were a great opportunity for the department to recruit locals to participate and consider a law enforcement career. And then the SNAP program is a completely run hourly program, and so at this point that program is not functioning. Next slide, please. On the departmental efficiency side, over the last year, we've had to flux and flow, and some of the things like the chief mentioned is that we've expanded our ability to have online reporting in both Spanish and English. We've looked to expand partnerships, including our partnership with environmental services on help with the camp cleanups and participating in that process. The partnership with Cottage Hospital and City Fire Department, trying to ensure employee safety as part of the COVID-19 response. That was a high priority. And then the continued use of the county sobering center, again, providing clients a full service program through that process. And that covers the budget piece at this point, and I'm going to turn it back over to Chief Malekian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next slide, please. So our challenge is, as we go forward, looking into the future, this really falls into 2 areas. One is how do we increase public trust in law enforcement, particularly in the face of an ongoing negative narrative? The answer, I think, is to continue the discussion about the transformation of policing and answering the question, what role do we want police to play in society? And the second bucket is the transformation of that mission. Given the staffing challenges facing us currently and likely to continue for the time being, we face a dilemma. You think back to slide 18, the 2 circles, the blue outer reactive circle and the lighter blue inner proactive circle. Where do we concentrate our resources and where do we spend our time? If we choose the proactive circle, the inner circle on slide 18, we focus on what's called problem-oriented policing with a corresponding increase in non-emergency response time. The reactive circle increases felt presence in neighborhood relationship building, but it may not address the specific problem areas in the most effective fashion. And an example of where this dilemma comes from would be the pending nightlife issue on State Street. The closure of the street to traffic, the reopening of bars and restaurants, the proliferation of parklets, which increases seating capacity, is likely to increase the number of calls for service in an area that is physically hard to reach. The police department will thus make greater use of bicycles and motorcycles to respond, which lands us in the proactive circle, but may draw resources from patrol of the reactive circle. In regards to executive development, there's been a question, certainly when I came on and before, about whether the 3-captain model or the 2-captain model was best. I believe that the 2-captain model will work, but at some point in the future, and clearly not this year, we will need to consider adding probably 2 lieutenants to truly flatten the organization and apportion the workload appropriately. And I think we could also make greater use of our professional staff. As I mentioned, that's a term I prefer over civilians and non-sworn. Each of the people who fill positions like that are experts in their area of expertise, and the department cannot function as a department without them. 2 examples of where I think we could use some additional assistance. One is an additional analyst in the business office to look at fleet costs and facility costs and see if there were ways, but I know there are ways to save money over the long term. And also the idea of investigative aids in the Detective Bureau. This would be in keeping with a RAND study that's a number of years old. I suggested that part of investigative work is administrative in nature and need not be handled by sworn personnel. And those are just 2 of several examples of how to make better use of professional staff. Next slide, please. I hope you will allow me to reminisce for a minute. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 50 years. I have served in several organizations, and during my time with the Justice Department, visited dozens of police and sheriff's departments around the country. I've served as a consultant to numerous agencies, most notably the city of Seattle. I say this only to demonstrate that I am well qualified to tell you that the people of this city have an excellent police department, staffed by some of the most caring and committed professionals I have ever encountered. The data that we showed you speaks for itself. We are not arresting our way out of social problems, and when we do make arrests, we very seldom use force, and then only the minimal amount required. We take great pride in taking the necessary time to solve problems, and we demonstrate caring and compassion to everyone we encounter. The discussion our society is having about how to transform law enforcement or restructure criminal justice to achieve true equity is valid and critically important. However, that discussion should not include the shaming or dismissal of the profession of law enforcement or the men and women who practice it. In the same way that we acknowledge that the police are not always right, as a society, we should also acknowledge that the police are not always wrong. My commitment to you, and I am confident that I speak for whomever comes after me, is that we will always provide equitable, effective, and transparent service. When we make a mistake, and we will own it and hold ourselves accountable to it. When asked what made him a great hockey player, Wayne Gretzky replied, "I skate to where the puck is going to be." The Santa Barbara Police Department is skating to where law enforcement is going to be, helping to play our part in making Santa Barbara sacred, safe, and busy. I thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief, and to your staff for presenting. And we'll take questions. Mr. Friedman, you go ahead first. Here you are. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. Thank you, Chief, for the presentation, and to all our law enforcement staff for all you've done. Just like the city attorney, it was a very challenging year, and you really stepped up to serve our community well and make some very major adjustments. And again, there was no playbook for some of the things we dealt with, so appreciate all that you and our staff have done. The first question I have is regard to the co-response. It was great last year with behavioral wellness and us to implement that with the county. If you could just speak a little bit to the effectiveness of it, and you said something where mentioned going to where the puck, where we want to be. And you mentioned that there might be an opportunity to increase that with the county. What is the possibility of us, and what would it take from our end to do that? So to just a little bit on the effectiveness, I think there's some good results there, and then what it would take to increase it, if not this year, next year.
The program, I think, by all accounts, has been extraordinarily effective. And I don't have some specific data points in front of me, but I know that virtually none of the co-response to calls have resulted in an arrest, but rather they've resulted in diversion, which is what our goal has been. With respect to what it would take, to get the second team, and I will say that behavioral wellness has expressed, interest in that concept. I think it really comes down to we have the restorative policing program, which is very close in terms of the mission and the target audience. And I think it would not require additional personnel. We would just fill that position, which we would like to do anyway, subject to the resolution of the reactive proactive dilemma I mentioned, and we would consolidate the restorative effort into co-response.
Great. So it would be filling a position. So I'd like to keep that in mind, and then seeing what the county has. I guess that would be for comments later, but that's actually very helpful. I thought it might have been needing to add a position. That actually might change our ability to do that. So I'll address that in comments. My second question comes into vagrancy issues, in particular along some of our more business corridors, Milpas, State Street. Just what could we do to, I know it's a challenge, especially on State Street with the closure to pedestrians. What are we doing to increase visibility of our law enforcement, just to have their presence there? And what can we do to have more of a presence, especially in those two areas where we have a lot of businesses and a lot of foot traffic?
We've taken a number of steps to increase our visibility, both along Milpas, State Street, and the waterfront hotels. We have put the bike team out. The volunteers in policing program, which had been suspended for over a year due to COVID, was reactivated about a month ago. They have been back out. We continue to work with the ambassadors. And one of the, as I mentioned earlier, one of the major decision points really over the next couple of weeks is going to be that proactive versus reactive. Where are we going to put emphasis? And it's not an all or nothing, but it certainly is of which one is going to get priorities. I think we do need to have probably more officers on bicycles and on motorcycles. I think that allows us to establish a presence and have greater mobility and the ability to move around. But I also recognize that at this point, every officer that went into that detail would come out of patrol, and that has consequences. So
that kind of gets to my next question. I think that last statement there, in terms of the bike patrol and also motorcycles, just trying to have that more community presence where you have the possibility for more community engagement, dialogue, where the public gets to know that the officers knew they can respond more with conversations as they're riding by. Is that something you're looking to do citywide? Where I'm going with this is in the northern part of town. Some of the larger issues are related to property crime, like thefts. You mentioned bicycles, it's a big issue, but also vehicle thefts. And to have maybe bicycles or motorcycles coming around and just being more present in some of the areas. So is that part of the proactive that you're looking at, is in other parts of town, not just necessarily on downtown?
That's correct. I mean, part of the whole focus of problem-oriented policing is sort of a continual analysis almost on a daily basis of where are issues, where are problems. We won't have the resources to put officers on every street or on every block. I mean, everybody knows that. So the ability to move them around And to establish what I call the felt presence is a critical part of that. You've described it very well. And it's really just a matter of doing an almost daily data analysis and saying, okay, today, this is where we're going to put people.
And it would be in all parts of town that we're looking at.
That's correct.
The last question I have, thank you, Chief, is related to the dangerous dog ordinance. You mentioned that we are working on that. Just one, if you could speak to the collaboration with the county on that. And then also, if we're looking at the county ordinance that was updated about 7 or 8 years ago, and along with some lessons learned there is the amount of public outreach we're going to do up front, because this is a very engaged group of individuals when it comes to this. If you could just speak to that process a little more and the upfront engagement.
Yeah, thank you for that. We are, Councilmember Friedman, we are looking very specifically, and Captain Arroyo has been very deeply involved in that, modifying our municipal code to bring it into alignment with, more closely into alignment with the county. Some of the issues on that are review of how animal bites are handled, for example, when they occur on private property, and particularly on the property where the dog lives. To take a look at our sheltering options and see what options there are there, and some things about how we review these matters administratively. And I don't know if I haven't answered your question in enough detail, I will reach out to Captain Arroyo, who's on the panel.
Oh, no, I think that's great. It was a little more detailed than in the presentation, but we're looking at all these things. In particular, the big part is how we're coming into alignment with the county, because we're in some cases, it's literally across the street is the county and then the city. So the more we can make it consistent with what the county's doing, I think it will serve our residents and our animals as better. So thank you again, Chief, and thank you to all of our staff for all you're doing to help keep our city safe. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Ms. Sneddon? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief Malikian. I just, I'll have more complete comments later, but just some questions at this point. Just first though, I just want to thank you for your emphasis. You said it in your presentation, and it comes across in all of your conversations with us and in the department, your emphasis on fairness and equity, and then transparency and accountability. And you said it in your presentation too, just acknowledging how difficult this has been and creating a way for us to continue this conversation, or really open this conversation. It's been one going on for a long time within the department, but I think now conversation with the public, conversation with us, and it's painstaking and it's painful at times. And I think I'm just very grateful that you're here and the way that you conduct these conversations. So I have some questions, and I think you touched on some of them in your presentation, but if we could just a little bit more detail maybe. So the one, you talked about professional staff and how they might be able to help with policing or help relieve some of the duties of policing. And just the first question of what is the best role for a sworn officer? That wheel, the calls for service wheel that you showed was astonishing, actually, with how many calls for service are not necessary for a sworn officer. Like you mentioned, like homelessness or mentally ill or neighborhood disturbances. So when is a sworn officer really the right call for that first contact, just so we can understand that? And then how would we dispatch differently or handle that differentiation of that officer, the sworn officer being that call versus someone trained in a different way to handle different types of calls? If you could just a little more detail on that.
Thanks, Councilmember Sen. I'm going to try to figure out how to compress about a 3-hour discussion into a couple of minutes, because I think you've touched on the core of what the challenge of this transformational discussion is actually all about. Right now, and not just here, everywhere, law enforcement through its communication center, for the most part, is the only agency that's available 24/7. So the challenge is these calls come in is to triage them. First step is to triage them in a fashion that determines is the role, do the police officers need to make an immediate response? Usually if somebody is in jeopardy, or should law enforcement make a sort of secondary response, which a good example of that is co-response. When co-response goes out there, for the most part, unless the person is engaged in some violent behavior, it really is the psychiatric social worker who takes the lead, and the officer is simply there as a presence to sort of calm the situation, but the officer is not trying to interact directly with the person. And then the third option, and the one you're talking about, and the one that I think is going to be a little bit more complicated to get to, is when we have other resources that dispatch can reach out to. And that, I think, we're almost going to be doing a two-part approach to this. I think we're going to try to, I don't mean to keep sounding like a broken record, but the role of dispatch in all of this cannot be understated. That they really are the sort of the triage point where these decisions are going to get made. They help determine what the state of mind of the responders are before they go to the call. Their role is critical. So I think in the short run, we're going to be doing a lot more looking around locally, who can partner with this SBAC, CityNet, for two examples. Do help us out with responding to calls involving homeless people, or particularly homeless people who are experiencing mental illness. And then I think over the long term, it's to start to figure out, well, what resources can be made available? And maybe we partner with the county. Maybe behavioral wellness has, behavioral wellness actually does have 24/7 response to the CARES team, but maybe that gets beefed up. And maybe our dispatch goes to them first or concurrently with law enforcement. I think I've used up my 2 minutes. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but it really is the core question that we're trying to answer.
Well, and even that's a question you're trying to answer, and looking at all the ways, I think, is the answer that I was looking for, that's something that is being worked on in a way. And then it seems to me, and I just want to verify, that we could use another co-response officer from behavioral wellness or more, or are our needs met there?
I think one of the things, and we're pursuing it right now, besides, I think it would be very good for us to create a second team. And we have the ability to do it without adding another FTE to the police department. And if the county, if behavioral wellness has another position, we can do that. The next step is really a force multiplier, and we're working on this, and that's a partnership with the county to cross jurisdictional lines. So that when the sheriff's co-response team is available, if ours isn't, they could come into the city and deal with this issue. And conversely, we would go into the county when their team wasn't available. So in effect, to create a regional effort. And that focus is that those discussions are underway right now, very preliminarily, but they're underway.
Thank you. And then just one more question about, well, I have another question about sort of harm reduction, but I'm going to save that because I think I don't actually need to ask that. But you mentioned things like changing the philosophy or performance metrics from how many tickets did you write to, did you say how many times you averted use of force or some different, or you gave a different example, but if you could talk a little bit more about that shift in philosophy of sort of how you're measuring performance, or how you could be in a way that moves us away from some of the paradigms that we're operating here.
Thank you. I think, traditionally, historically, certainly while I've been in this business, the measure of patrol effectiveness was how many field interview cards did you write, how many arrests did you make, how many tickets did you write? And those are perfectly valid metrics. The problem is they're not the only metrics. And so we're in the process of developing an expanded set of metrics to include things like, foot patrol in parks, or minutes of foot patrol in residential neighborhoods, or non-enforcement contacts with business, just to name a few. We really haven't compiled a complete list, but we're really trying to say, a part of that, and this comes back to this issue of reactive versus proactive. If we do that, and I personally think that we should, I think that's the direction that we need to go, then what's going to give on the other end is response times for non-enforcement, non-emergency calls for service, and deciding what those are and how to present that to the public and all that will be a challenge. But I really, that whole daily drop of corrosion thing, what it stems from is a sense of from an individual officer's perspective, am I accomplishing anything? At some point in your career, you say, well, am I accomplishing anything? And usually it's because this emphasis on moving from call to call to call doesn't allow you to be involved in the outcome. Doesn't allow you to, as an individual officer, to help shape the solution. And I personally believe that police officers are ideally positioned to not do it all, but to shape it, or to make sure that people have access to the right resources, whether it's city or county. They're an incredible leverage point if we give them the time to do it.
Thank you. I guess I have one more question, sorry, about officer wellness. And I know this has been an emphasis, and I think with all that has gone on, I've had the experience with officers where we went and visited a school. The school was asking, could we have more officers coming? I spoke to an officer who said, well, we're not sure if we're welcome or not welcome. Should we be there or not be there? And the just emotional toll on everyone, and with the sort of changing definition of roles. So just that one question sort of about general officer wellness resources, that we have enough resources for that. But then also it's maybe a numbers question of like, what percentage of our officers live locally? That's something I think when we talk about being, community policing or being part of the community more, and I guess it'll be part of a different budget discussion about what we could do about that. But what is it, a high percentage, low percentage? How many of our officers?
Councilmember, I haven't counted that, and I should, and I will, but I don't think it's very high, and I don't know, so I don't want to guess at a number, but I don't think it's very high. I'll get that for you, and it is a challenge. It's besides just the obvious things like housing costs and what it takes. It makes a huge difference to live in or adjacent to the city. And in another jurisdiction I worked in, I tried to develop an incentive program that gave preferential scheduling and things to people who, lived in or around the city, and ran into some legal barriers on that and couldn't do it. But it is a challenge across the country. It is not unique to here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions for the chief on the budget or policing issues? I do myself have some questions. So we're undergoing a civilian oversight process, Chief, and I know Lieutenant Hill has been sitting in the meetings as a resource, and I know one of your points here was increasing public trust, and so that oversight function is after something has happened and there's an instance of misconduct. Can you talk a little bit about hiring practices? And I like where Ms. Sneddon was going with officer wellness, because I know that we have a strong program in our police department called At Ease, and it's employee assistance if someone needs help. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Certainly, the emphasis on on employee wellness has been a critical part, and it started before I got here, but there are a number of aspects of it. There is the ability for officers who are undergoing or feel like they're undergoing stress, that they've got a number of places that they can go to talk, and whether it's a formal approach to the city, the IDs program puts people in contact with peer support. But this idea that you're not alone, that the dilution of that daily drop of corrosion. There's physical wellness. I was struck when I first came to work here. There's a woman who is, she was a former chef at one of the major hotels until it closed, who's developed a healthy meals program. And so if you come into the police department, you will see a refrigerator full of healthy salads and other foods that people can buy for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, as opposed to the traditional vending machine with chips and candy and those things. That physical wellness matters. Part of the culture is for officers and all employees. I keep saying officers because we talk about officer wellness, but it really does apply to the professional staff as well, is to just get in the habit of saying, are you okay? It's, you know, I came up in an era where if you went to, you know, something, a call that was particularly difficult or horrendous in some fashion, you were just supposed to shrug it off. And I think we all know now that you don't shrug it off, you just bury it inside, it comes back later. So the At-Ease program is focused on that. And again, I can, if you want to go into it now, I can get, Captain Arroyo directly oversees that. But that program is really just getting traction, and I think is going to make a big difference.
Thank you. But to go back to hiring, so, you know, for the public who are listening, that you have measures in place so that our police department doesn't hire somebody that has an anger management problem or problems, or you know, what we saw in the news was someone had a record of brutality and then they get hired somewhere else. Can you tell us how we would prevent?
They might get hired somewhere else, but they're not going to get hired here. The background, and I think quite frankly, the state regulations are changing anyway. They're probably not going to get hired hardly anyway. I mean, California's been out in front on that for a long time. But our background process is very thorough. It's very focused, and we simply wouldn't hire somebody that we thought was a risk. I meant what I said about shifting that attention from saying, "Oh, would you make a good police officer?" We've shifted it to, "Are you a good human being?" We can teach you how to be an excellent police officer. We can't necessarily teach you how to be a good human being. I will say, and I don't mean to, again, sound like a broken record, but we have good human beings in this police department.
Okay. My final question is about body-worn cameras, and we believe that that'll increase the public trust as well.
We do. There's a lot of evidence for that, and we look forward to having it. There's some the challenge, the biggest challenge in the body-worn cameras, and there's a couple of things I should comment about that. One is to make sure that the camera is the simplest part of this whole process. The recording of things, everybody can do it. They do it now. It's the storage and retrieval, because if we don't have the capacity, and we have developed that, but I'm just saying this is the challenge for this, is to have the ability to store this video and to retrieve it when we need it. The second part of this, as it comes to public trust, and I have some meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks to establish a policy on this before the cameras are rolled out. And that's to say, if we have a major incident, how quickly are we going to release the video? State law, I think, is it's either 45 or 60 days. But I believe that we probably need to look at 3 to 5 days.
Okay. Well, we'll check on public comment, but I did want to give you notice that Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez and I will be asking you for financial support for the youth program that Isis Castaneda described at the April 20th meeting after the arrests were made related to the Liberty Street shootings. We had a great discussion with the school superintendent and Saul Serrano from the Youth Safety Partnership and ISIS from the Santa Barbara Teen Network. So that program, it would be a summer program and particularly focused on the families that were traumatized by the Liberty Street fatal shootings. And we're hoping that there would be some support from the police budget, something really modest like $5,000 to support those youth. So you'll be seeing that. So thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Gutierrez, questions?
Yes, thank you, Chief, for your presentation. My question is, I don't know if I'm accurate or not, but I noticed there's a lot of new officers that are not from the area. What is the police department doing to help the new officers get familiar with the community, with different organizations? I know you have the community liaisons, but what does the department do to engage other officers to the community, to get familiarized with the community? The chief before you had mentioned that the PD was a commuter station because a lot of the police officers lived out of the area. Is the PD doing something for these new officers that come in to get familiar with the community they're working with?
Councilmember Gutierrez, absolutely. The focus of the field training officer program, besides, first step is to learn the geography of the city, particularly if you're not from here, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. And the second part then is to learn within each patrol beat, who are what agencies serve that, what agencies serve that area or that community, who are the players, who are the people who are, I'm not saying this well, who are delivering services in some fashion to members of the community, just who people are. And that relationship building, that is one of the great losses in terms of not living in the city or not living around it, because then you do come in and out. And that's, like I said, that's a challenge everywhere. One of the things that I've done in another agency was added an extra month to the field training officer program, where the officers spent a month working with community groups in a non-uniform capacity. And we just sort of farmed them out. Now, we haven't done that here, and I haven't measured sort of what the resource impact of that would be. But it is a program that other agencies have used and used effectively, because you've raised a very important challenge. If we're trying to change the culture away from simply responding and enforcing the law, then we have to find a way to build those relationships.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chief, for answering our questions. If there are no other questions from the council, I'll ask the clerk to check in the GoToWebinar audience. Raise your hand, please, members of the public, if you would like to make public comment on the police budget or these issues. We're happy to hear from you. Thanks, Chief. Stand by.
Very good. Madam Mayor and Council, we do have 3 people who have raised their hand. Additionally, Matt Lowe is logged on, and Mr. Lowe, I've sent you a communication, see if you wish to be unmuted and speak. So we'll have Lee Heller, then Lisa Kenyon, then Taylor Black Law. Lee Heller, please go ahead.
Madam Mayor and Council, I wanted to thank Mr. Malakian for an excellent presentation. and the police department for their excellent service. I moved back into the city last September after 18 years in the hinterlands. And I'm grateful to be back in the city with a department that's providing so many quick responses to so many calls. I also wanted specifically to speak to the work underway to update the animal control code. I'm really glad to hear that that's happening and that it's made it to the city attorney's office. As Councilmember Friedman knows, because he was working at the county when it happened, the County of Santa Barbara went through extensive review of their old ordinances, especially their dangerous dog ordinance, and updated it to bring it more in keeping with modern approaches to managing the balance between public safety and recognizing what I'll call normal dog behavior, which is an important balance to strike. So I would just encourage stakeholder engagement and involvement. As Mr. Friedman will tell you, the animal community gets very agitated, and having animal community member involvement and feedback earlier on tends to result in better outcomes. So I hope you will pursue that. I would also encourage the animal control department to look at outsourcing the administrative hearings on dangerous dogs to the county, which has more officers doing more of these and also enables a judicial review by someone who was not involved in the original enforcement activity. I do want to express appreciation for animal control. They've been very responsive to my calls. So this is not meant to be critical of them. It's just about aligning the city and the county, since there is service overlap, particularly because the animals that the city deals with end up impounded at the county also. Thank you so much.
Ms. Heller, next speaker.
Next speaker is Lisa Kenyon. Lisa Kenyon, please go ahead. Go ahead, Lisa Kenyon. You're unmuted. All right, we will come back to Lisa Kenyon. Next is Tila Blacklaw. Tila Blacklaw, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tila Blacklaw, and I have been a Santa Barbara resident for about 6 years now. I wanted to refocus the conversation on community safety and emphasize that increased policing is not synonymous with community safety. So I am urging the council to reconsider spending $80 million on a new police station, find alternatives to spending that much money on a police station. That is not community safety. I am urging you to reduce the policing budget. Increased patrolling is not community safety. Think about all of the members of our community who do not feel safer when they see a cop car pull up behind them, when they do not feel safer when they see increased police presence. I don't feel safer. My body tightens. I wait for it to be over, and then I feel safer. So what is community safety? Increased spending on mental health services is community safety. Affordable housing is community safety. Increased spending on youth services is community safety. The idea that I heard someone speaking earlier about increasing patrols, it's not possible to have a police officer patrolling every block, as if that is what we want in the community. That is not what we want in the community. Policing often happens after an incident occurs, and we need to put our money towards programs that prevent incidents in the first place. And again, mental health services, affordable housing, youth services, these are the things that actually make our communities more safe. And that's what we need. Budgets are value statements. And so we need to spend our city's money in alignment with what our values are. That is not increased policing. It's not increased spending on policing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Kenyon or another speaker?
Our next speaker is Matt Lowe and then Lisa Kenyon. Matt Lowe, please go ahead.
Mr. Lowe, we can't hear you.
We'll give Mr. Lowe another moment, then we can call on Lisa Kenyon and come back to Mr. Lowe.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Lowe, we will go to Lisa Kenyon, then come back to you, and then to Jill Anderson. So Lisa Kenyon, go ahead. Lisa Kenyon, go ahead. You can unmute yourself. There you go.
All right, sorry about that. Thank you. My name is Lisa Kenyon. I happen to be a resident of the unincorporated area of the county. I wanted to go ahead and just ditto everything that Lee Heller said and share a little bit more of my input in that the last 5 years of my working career was as the shelter operations supervisor at the Santa Barbara Shelter for County Animal Services. And in that capacity, I did work closely with your city animal control officers on a daily basis. And that included keeping up to date on the status of the city's dangerous dog cases while those dogs were staying in our protracted care at the county shelter. I think you will find that the county's vicious and restricted ordinance language that was updated and adopted back in 2015 will be much more effective, efficient, and timely in addressing dangerous dog cases in comparison to the limitations imposed under the city's current code language. And to what Dr. Heller said, there was significant public input on this from all our passionate and compassionate colleagues out there in the public. If I could also take just a brief moment to give a shout out to Shadow and Roxy's moms who are participating in this meeting, two of my favorite all-time shelter dogs who have passed away. I am so pleased to know that the city is looking at updating the city animal control codes. And I thank you for your time and wish you all a spectacular day. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker?
Matt Lowe, you can go ahead. And after Matt Lowe, Jill Anderson. So we'll give Mr. Lowe a moment to unmute and get going.
Am I live?
We can hear you.
Hallelujah. Dang, this system. Whew. All right, well, now that I'm stressed. Yes, Council, thank you for having this special hearing today. It's time for these important topics. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for making it a special thing. So appreciate that effort. And I just want to address, kind of some things within the community perspective and understanding when we're talking about policing, we're talking about safety, and that the city, the people are in charge of safety. The safety isn't done by force or protection and so we are safety by being together, by being community. And so the more that you enforce that, the more you allow those community programs to come about, the more we will be community together and be safe. And so what that takes is a reorganizing of funds and money and priorities. And so I really support the effort to, change the way the funds are being structured. I don't think it's appropriate to continue to watch the police budget increase like it has been over the 8 years. We've watched it grow $10 million in the past 8-9 years. And so now is the time. The future of policing is to let it be policing. Don't try to join it together with restorative or this. It's not restorative. I'm a restorative justice facilitator, and so it's not restorative. It doesn't fall in the lines of restoration. And the way that we make the community whole again is by supporting the community programs. We need to address the way, definitely address the way police engage in the community. There's been a lot of broken trust, even in the under the helm of the previous chief. And so we need to have those difficult conversations. Those conversations still haven't been had after last year. And so, we can talk all the good social justice things and the anti-racist programs, but we need to start walking our walk. And so, and what that looks like is community programs. And yes, behavioral wellness, fund that, but we don't need to have police in partnership with that. Let's expand behavioral wellness. We don't need to have officers attached to that. It's a 24/7 program. and it has a lot of success, and the community backs it. We also have Santa Barbara Response Network, and they have a great 2-in-1 program for all the community resources. There's many resources in this community that we can get behind and put money behind to make sure that we have community safety. And so, I know y'all are in the community, these programs, and so now is the time to let your talk match your walk. And so, let's support our community safety and reinvest in the community.
Thanks, Mr. Lowe. So, Ms. Anderson there?
Jill Anderson, please go ahead. Jill Anderson, please go ahead. We will come back to Ms. Anderson. E. Howard Green, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm pleased to have attended this session. And I have a sort of a philosophical question that I know don't get direct answers, but what's the theory in policing about rigid enforcement versus practical? For instance, on the freeway, 66 miles an hour is illegal except in a couple places. And yet, I don't think anyone would expect to get a ticket for going flow of traffic at that. I'm particularly concerned when we're talking about animal control. I like to walk my dog with him carrying the leash or dragging the leash and my being right with him, but that allows him to stop and sniff and maybe go into the bushes without my impeding him. I don't think that's a violation of the intent of the leash law because he has a leash and he's under my control. But it's that sort of thing that gets people concerned about policing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Q. Did Ms. Anderson return?
Jill Anderson, please go ahead. Jill Anderson, go ahead. You're unmuted. Ms. Anderson, go ahead. Okay, Madam Mayor, Ms. Anderson was the final person with their hands raised.
Well, we thank everyone who participated in public comment, and we'll go to our closing remarks on the police station, the police department, but why don't we ask about the police station? Chief, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, two things, Madam Mayor, if I could, with regards to questions that came up that my staff is more familiar with than I was. There, to answer Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez's question, there is a 6-week post-academy community orientation plan that is focused specifically on introducing new officers to the community and people in the community that the officers should be aware of. The second question is what percentage of our officers live in the community? 20% of them live in, refers only to sworn officers, 20% of them live in Santa Barbara, Goleta, or Carpinteria. And 50% live somewhere between Santa Maria and Oxnard.
Okay, thank you for that. And then in terms of the police station where you're calling from now, it's too small for the operations. If you could just give us a thumbnail sketch of why we're looking for a new headquarters, sir.
Certainly, Madam Mayor, members of council, the police station and when COVID restrictions lift, I suspect we could do some tours, but it's incredibly small. It's very outdated in terms of its design. We outgrew it a long time ago, and we actually pay rent on an adjacent office building that probably is costing the city more than it needs to. And the truth of the matter is, when we talk about welcoming the community and what that means, I've worked in a place that had a building where community members actually came and held community meetings in that building. This current building wouldn't accommodate that. The new building is designed specifically to do that. But the short version is that it's not only too small, it's probably the seismic issues are also of some concern.
Right. So if we had an earthquake, it's not a safe place to be. Okay. Thank you, Chief. We'll ask for closing comments from the council. At this point, I think we should power through, even though we've been at this for 2 hours, and usually we take a break, but I think we're close. So Ms. Gutierrez, go ahead, please.
I just want to thank the department for their quick response with the community, especially after the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protest, and how quickly the department really responded to the needs of the community. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, and there's work being done. But there's 2 officers that I've been working closely with that have opened my eyes to other perspectives, and I just really want to thank them. One's Lieutenant Aaron Baker, and the other one is Detective Sean Hill. So I wanted to acknowledge them because sometimes officers are behind the scenes, but in my district in particular, they've really helped out, and they really care. Both of them are fathers and are raising their families here. So I just wanted to thank both of them. And thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Ms. Gutierrez. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I kind of said everything I wanted to say earlier, but just wanted to follow up on the issue of the co-response. And given that it isn't a new position, I'm not sure if it's one of the ones we're keeping vacant this year, so that changes it. But I would like Mr. Casey and staff, if you're listening, just to get more information on if it's a possibility to work with the county to maybe implement that second position to give the additional coverage this year, just to see if it's even possible. I'm unclear at this point on if it's a vacant position or not, or if the county's in there. I think it would be much worthwhile to bring back to us on June 9th. But other than that, thank you, Chief, and thank you to all staff for what you're doing, and look forward to June 9th.
Thanks. Ms. Snedden?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you again, Chief Luckian. It really is an honor to have you working with us for this transitional time. I'm really appreciative. I just want to emphasize a few budgetary things and program things that from your presentation that I really want to support in that. First, to support the youth programs, Madam Mayor, that you and Mayor Pro Tem Gutierrez are putting forward. Now that I understand so much more about those, completely agree that this is a great use of resources. So I will join you in that ask to support those programs. And in general, as you laid out in that sort of diagram, working toward programs of prevention rather than reaction. And I think you're already well along the way of looking at that emphasis, but I just want to encourage in this next year, 2-year budget cycle, that we really continue to think about where we can put our resources towards the prevention and building community relationships and having those conversations. And I think we're making a lot of progress, and I'm feeling very positive about that, and the responsiveness in terms of as opposed to defensiveness. I think it's been for all of us a challenge when the community comes forward and lets us know that we're missing something, that the openness and transparency to listen and to be making measurables toward addressing these concerns. So that just really emphasizing the prevention versus the reaction. And then continuing to work towards minimizing police as first contacts. You've given examples of in contact with someone who is homeless, that really a police contact isn't the best first contact for a person experiencing homelessness to have. And there was a recent news story about 100 incidents a day at Cottage Hospital where people are brought in or referred because they're a danger to themselves or others for mental health problems, but they don't have anywhere near that number of facilities or beds. And so we just really having a mental health programs and support crisis. And whatever we can do to get that co-response, to really lobby the county for more assistance, more help, lobby the state for more funding, lobby the federal government for more funding. This mental health component, and so often that police officers are in the position of handling mental health contacts that really it's not favorable for anybody involved. So continue and really emphasizing that move toward the mental health component and minimizing police as that first contact, which is something that you've mentioned, and I really want to go that direction. And also the emphasis on dispatch, what we can do there to sort of triage what the responses might be, so that when you mention that direction, I just want encouragement in that direction also. And just to say and acknowledge, this is really complex issue. Everybody knows that. And for as many people who call in and contact us about not wanting police presence, we have people in community, students, teachers, schools, who are disappointed in us that we're not having more response. And it is very confusing and complex issue. And I don't think we have the answers at this point, but I think keeping the dialogue open, and really, really applaud your focus on transparency, accountability, and the work with the Community Formation Commission, I think is our first step of really responsive dialogue and communication back and forth. And I'm really relying on the direction from that commission to help us understand ourselves in context. And there's so much that's positive. And I really, this is a good opportunity to emphasize that and acknowledge the complexity and just gratitude to you for being here. And I would also like to acknowledge Lieutenant Sean Hill and his role in really trying to understand the issues and then address them. And we're not there. We're all figuring it out. But appreciation. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Harmon and then Mr. Jordan.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Chief. I really appreciate that presentation. And I think I'm going to be able to be brief because so much of what I've already said, I just want to second and echo. And one of the things that really stood out to me in your presentation, Chief, is that you've taken this call for transparency and accountability and haven't sort of layered it on top, but seem to really be trying to turn it into the foundation of what your department does. And that's transformative. That to me is the core of 21st century policing. That's what's going to move us forward. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And that's a huge task. You laid it out very well, how significant that is. That, it takes time and it takes sustained effort and sustained commitment from all of us. So I just want to acknowledge today the incredible work that you and your officers have done to take that on. And as Councilmember Sneddon said, it is ongoing. It's truly complex, but it was clear to me that is a core, is becoming a core value, and that you're prioritizing that and making that the foundation. And I really value that. And I think our community really values that. And it's clear in the engagement with the Community Formation Commission as well. And I've had many conversations with officers that have been just so positive about what's going to come from that community engagement. So I think that deserves to be said. And I appreciate, I want to send my appreciation to them actually for being open, being willing to engage. And that's the first step. And again, there's so much work to be done. It is incredibly complex, but we have partners in this, in your department. And today is a day to acknowledge that. So I really did want to appreciate that we've taken a step Many more steps to go, certainly. But beginning is a very important place to be, and it deserves to be recognized. So my appreciation. And I'm gonna sort of shift gears very briefly here, just to talk about the work, bringing the ordinances in line related to the dangerous dog ordinance and animal welfare. I did just want to put out there, because we had public comments that I've heard from multiple constituents on this as well. And I think it's easy to forget that our police department has so many functions. You know, often we sort of, or at least in the last year, have really been thinking about it in one particular way. But, you know, animal control is a thing that comes up with some regularity. So I really appreciate that this is being moved on. And I do think it's important that we bring our ordinances in line. And that brings me just to a final point that it sort of occurred to me as I was talking about this. We ask you to do way too much. We ask our officers to take on so many things, as my colleagues have said, that you know, really shouldn't be on their plate. It's clear to me that you just have so much that we've asked of you. And I really do hope that we as a council, as a community, can continue this conversation, how to ease the burden on you as well. I think that is a path forward for us, and whether it's through co-response, whether it's through other opportunities to lighten the load of our officers, I think that's something that is a conversation that's worth having, and I appreciate that you're partners in that conversation as well. So with that, that's all my comments. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan. You're muted.
Clicked the pause button and forgot there was another one, sorry. There's probably very little left to say, everybody said it, but I was privileged this morning to hearing Chief Malikian talk a little bit about this also in front of another group. And I just come across these people like this once in a while, where I just realize we all missed an opportunity to meet somebody much earlier in our lives and have them spend a little more time with us. I know he's a local, I know he's not going anywhere, but it's just unfortunate that we just meet him under these circumstances and get the expertise from him in transition. And I just want to offer my appreciation, Chief, for stepping up, for some of the things you say, for some of the things you continue to do. One of my takeaways from both this morning and today was your analogy to the thousands of foot level view and also the 500-foot level view, in that there is a change in the method of policing that is overdue and is coming, but the change here locally also has to incorporate the view that we have a very good police department with wonderful human beings in it operating right now. And our task is to build upon that foundation, not rip it apart and start over, but find a way to move towards whatever we're calling the next method of policing, 21st century, social equity, whatever that is, but making sure we don't lose the wonderful men and women that we already have working hand in hand with us in this community. And I appreciate that. I feel strongly about that. I'm unfortunately the oldest, whitest guy in this group sitting up here, and I work really, really hard at this issue to maintain an open mind. And I sometimes feel like people like me are not given the opportunity to participate in that vein. And I hope that opportunity is much more prevalent in the future, that it's more inclusive of everybody in the community. And because I think all of us have something to offer, whether you're an old white guy or a young person of color. So again, thank you, Chief, very much. I'm happy you're going to be here after we get through with you, because I know you're a valuable resource in the community. And I can't tell you again how much I think this time with us means. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Any other council comments? I have some closing remarks. like my council members to go first. Okay. Thank you, Chief. First, I'll say that I do support changes to the dog ordinance, and I know our city attorney is still in the meeting and that he can hear our support for an improved ordinance. And, you know, the conversation today has been very good, and it has me reflecting on how the pandemic did teach us that sending an officer isn't always the first choice. Well, for instance, the jail actually released people, right, because of the virus, contagious, the fear of everybody getting it. And so that says one thing about, you know, about incarceration, but also I relate that to how we responded to homelessness, that we sent SB Act and CityNet to the streets to talk to our unhoused neighbors who were having trouble, who were having a mental breakdown. And so there is a way that we have a community response rather than a police response to some of these challenges. So I do support your budget as presented, but I do want to acknowledge what a couple of the public comment speakers said about the need for a change in culture and a new awareness that our society should put resources and public tax dollars on community building, on supporting families, eliminating poverty, making sure everyone has a place to live, that all of our children have access to healthcare and a good education. So if they're doing well in school, they're going to make good choices. We really have to build, strong children. And I want to support your department and all the good folks working there. And I would say that it's the new police chief. And I know Mr. Casey's taking note of what we're saying. It'll be up to the new police chief to carry on what you've been talking about, Chief Malekian, and that is the transformation of this world where we support people and not punish them, and find ways to rehabilitate people and do restorative practices and prevent crime and help people when they make a mistake. So I thank you for what you've done so far to supporting and treating fairly everyone in our city. We're very sensitive about our undocumented families, our youth, again, our unhoused neighbors, people with disabilities, people with mental illness. They need help. With that, I want people to know that this city council, this mayor, I guess I should speak for myself, and our police department really is embracing those ideas of change. So those are my remarks, Chief. And if you had any closing remarks, we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, members of the council, for the opportunity. I've said in several venues, and I'll say in this public venue, that I regard the opportunity to be here and to be of service a privilege. This council and this city and the men and women that work in this police department deserve my best, and that's what I try to do. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll close the police budget discussion, and we will close this meeting with thanks to all the city staff that supported this meeting, the presentation of the city attorney's department budget as well. The next time we pick up a budget hearing is Wednesday, May 26th. So next week, and it's the Public Works Department, our biggest department, and the General Fund Measure C capital program. So with that, thank you to everyone. Meeting adjourned.